Welcome to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast, where we bring you the latest insights from across the Scottish red meat sector, from the public body that works on its behalf. I'm Claire Taylor, your host for today's episode. Join us as we dive into market trends, brand communications and industry development projects in relation to Scotland's red meat sector, featuring experts, guests, farmers and stakeholders. Together we'll explore the key facts and perspectives shaping our sector, keeping you informed and engaged with the ever-evolving landscape of the red meat industry. Hello and welcome to the December edition of the QMS podcast. We're in the final run up to Christmas, and as we look ahead to 2026, we'd love your help in shaping where this podcast goes next. Our listener survey is now live via your podcast app and across QMS social channels, and everyone who completes it will receive a Scotch beef, Scotch lamb or a specially selected pork branded beanie or snood as a thank you. In today's episode, we'll be diving into the latest updates to the QMS cattle and sheep standards. Niall Jeffrey and Kathryn Kerr join us to talk us through the consultation process, what's changing and what can farmers expect from January. This conversation comes as QMS marks 35 years of quality assurance in Scotland, a milestone that highlights how assurance underpins Scotland's reputation, market access and integrity at home and internationally. Our guests share why maintaining rigorous, trusted standards matters now more than ever. But first, I spoke with Sarah Miller, who has an exciting date for your diary coming up in March. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah, in the very busy run-up to Christmas. And last month's episode, we were talking all about lamb for St Andrew's Day, so it'd be great to catch up with you how it all went in the end.
Yeah, no, so Lambs for St Andrew's Day is just a campaign that keeps growing and growing, and what's amazing, I think, is that it started from an idea with George Purvis at the Rural Leadership Programme over 10, 15 years ago now, I can't remember which, a significant amount of time, and from then, it has gone from an idea to now one of the largest days in our calendar. And the piece that we've really focused on over the last couple of years is taking all that enthusiasm from that learning environment with the Institute of Auctioneers have done such a brilliant job getting lamb into schools and taking that into the political arena. So we've now, this must be the third or fourth year I think, we've held a stand in Holyrood. They put lamb on at the canteen. It was the fastest selling dish in the Holyrood canteen, but it also gives us an opportunity in an informal way to engage with our decision makers about why Scotch lamb is so important. And for me, that's a really core part of what we do at QMS. We have all of this data, which, in its raw form, how do you make that exciting? But taking that through into a much more engaging way, particularly with decision makers, is something that I'm really proud of. And I think, that campaign, just shows how you can take really core key messages and make them fun for different audiences.
Oh, it's great to hear that it's just growing strength to strength every year, Sarah, and like you say, that great political engagement, and great to see that lamb was the top dish at Parliament. Let's hope. I know in the podcast last month we were discussing how do we make it a year-long habit, not just that one day. So maybe that's going to be the next stage, is it's going to feature a lot more regularly in Parliament's menu. But of course, you're busy with Lamb for St Andrew's Day, but I know you've had a bit of a mad calendar over the last few months. What else have you been very busy with?
Yeah, well, it was interesting when I saw the briefing note in this. I thought, gosh, what have I been doing for the last 3 months? I think the word of the last 3 months has definitely been collaboration. Because my role at QMS, Kate as the chair really is the kind of front man, front woman, who's out there with stakeholders. Where my job sometimes is more in the background, making things happen, and part of making things happen is around collaboration. And a really core part of how we do things at QMS is really proactively making sure collaboration is at the top of our agenda. And that all really starts with, and one of the kind of key mechanisms for that is the Scottish Red Meat Resilience Group, which actually celebrated its 6th anniversary, I think, this September. And again, a bit like Lamb for St Andrew's Day, the Scottish Red Meat Resilience Group started with quite a high level kind of conceptual idea that all of the stakeholder organisations within the red meat sector, whilst we all knew each other, we didn't really work together purposefully on what I'd call the kind of big ticket items. So back in 2019, all the kind of key organisations were brought together for the first time, And we asked ourselves some big questions. We then evolved that group over the last 6 years, and right through to this year, this September, where we brought everyone together again. And what we were doing there was reflecting on what was our first real piece of work together, which is our Meeting Our Potential campaign, and to agree the next steps for that campaign. And I think, again, that was a real kind of source of pride, having seen that go from the kind of high level, could we do this, and actually being told, well, you'll never get everyone to agree on a piece of work together, to be able to kind of look back at some of the success for Meeting a Potential in the last 6 months and agree, what we want to do. And I think having that buy-in from everyone, and it's work like that, I think, that kind of positive collaboration and really purposeful collaboration, that's probably the word I'm looking for, that purposeful collaboration. It then makes some of the harder things that we need to do. For example, I know you've been talking to Kathryn and Niall about our new cattle and sheep standards. It makes those harder conversations much easier to have, because we've all got that same shared of journey, purpose, and actually we all know that we're all invested in the same thing at the end of the day. So I think that purposeful collaboration has been a huge part of the last few months. We've heard lots about Anuga on this podcast, because it is one of the kind of key highlights of the year. But was over in Anuga for 4 or 5 nights this year. And again, my key takeaway from there is the world is looking for beef. The world does not have enough beef. I think I've said on this podcast before, I grew up behind a farmer's market stall, and to me, the job I have at QMS, I'm still behind that farmer's market stall now, just doing it on a much larger scale. So I love getting out to Anuga and speaking to customers, and it was great to meet customers from previous years. I've been in the job 4 years now, nearly 4 years come April, so seeing the kind of the cycle of that coming round was really quite nice this year. At the end of November, again, another key part of collaboration is between the levy boards. So in the UK, you have 4 levy boards that cover the cattle and sheep sector. You've got us in Scotland, you've got HDB, who cover cattle, sheep and pigs in England, you've got HCC, who cover cattle, sheep, I think they do pigs as well, down in Wales, although I was always told if you see a pig in Wales, it's on the wrong side of the border. Well, there we go. And LMC, who cover cattle and sheep in Northern Ireland. So one of the key, again, transitions over the last few years, so we have obviously levy redistribution, which was the evolution of the ring fence fund over that kind of 2021 to 2022 period. And one of the key things that we made, again, a commitment as levy boards, was to purposefully collaborate. And part of that purposeful collaboration is we get together, our whole senior teams come together twice a year, and we literally sit down and go through our implementation plans and say, what can we be doing better together? Where is there ways for us to work together? And actually, what are the things that we're missing? And particularly just now, because quite a lot of policy change going on across obviously the different nations, where it's slightly different places at slightly different speeds. So having that kind of shared journey and again just reviewing where we are is really important. So that came out with some really good ideas for collaboration for the next year, particularly around that kind of reputation marketing, because we all want red meat, whether it be Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, England, to be seen as a positive contributor to economic growth and to nutrition and to the environment. And those stories don't stop at borders. So the more that we can purposefully collaborate on that's a good phrase, that kind of helps us achieve those goals. So it kind of feels like I've not been doing too much of what I call the sexy work, but it's all stuff that's really important. So yeah, and I can't quite believe that we are now sitting in the second week in December.
Well, Sarah, you've had a very busy few months, and you just mentioned something I was going to ask you, and we do have Niall and Kathryn coming up later in the podcast, because of course we are marking 35 years of quality assurance at QMS, and they're going to be discussing some of the updates to the cattle and sheep standards. But even just to sort of put to you a little bit around what the significance of this milestone and what it really should mean to our listeners.
So I often say when we talk about farm assurance in Scotland or quality assurance in Scotland that Scottish farmers do not realise how significant they are. And so we at QMS, our assurance schemes are whole of life, whole of supply chain. And I think that is one of the most impactful things that farmers can do to take control of the reputation of their industry. I don't think it's often seen like that, but I'm really proud of Scotland's farmers for what they do, and I don't think they get the credit. And I know that the assessment, the audit, can be a challenge. I know we have an annual audit at QMS every year, and I hate it. So I totally get where they're coming from.
Yeah.
But I think when you take that step back and say, okay, we've got these kind of big challenges, people are challenging, what does red meat do? To be able to say, actually, the whole of our supply chains are assessed every year, that's really important. And if we go back in the history, like say, Scotland has been pioneers in this. So Scottish farmers have been known as being pioneers around responsible farming. And again, nobody can take that away from our farmers, because this was farmer-led from a group, I think it was the Scottish Pig Initiative, initially up in the northeast. So there's something really special about that. And I think when we kind of take that principle of it's a farmer-led initiative, and what we want to do is make sure that we use this to bat for Scottish farming as hard as we can. It's sometimes reminding yourself of those principles when it comes to making changes to the scheme, and I think you hear a bit more about that from Kathryn and Niall about making sure that, if we're making changes, what does this mean to what we can see about Scotch beef or Scotch lamb in the marketplace? What does this mean to the reputation? Is this going to add cost? And if it's going to add cost, can we justify it? Because we have seen some pretty big changes in the red meat market globally this year, and farm assurance, quality assurance absolutely still has its place. I think one of the interesting things that I didn't know until I came into this job at QMS is that over the years there's been quite a few evolutions of what quality assurance, farm assurance has been seen as. And one of the most interesting things is when the assurance standards evolved to being across the whole of the supply chain, it was actually based on a piece of work around eating quality, and the kind of key standards that came from across the supply chain were rooted down into the key areas that had been identified that impacted the quality of meat. And that's why I've kind of been calling them farm assurance, quality assurance. We always refer to quality assurance here because that is what we are looking to do. We are looking to make sure that we can, at the critical control points across the whole of the supply chain, across the whole of the animal's life, we can say we have done the right things so that that piece of meat ends up on a consumer's plate in the best way possible. We often get asked anytime I'm out and about, what's the best breed of cattle that'll be the tastiest eating experience? What's the best production system? And for Scotland, that question, you almost need to turn it round, because as a farmer, if you can say, I have this breed of cattle or this breed of sheep on this type of system and I'm aiming for this level of profitability, I think for me, no one can argue with that as an individual farmer. But what we can do is actually look at the kind of more objective ways around eating quality and bring those two things together. And when you bring those two things together, you get the right cow or sheep reared in the right place under the right conditions for profitability for that business. So it's really looking at empowering the individual, but then also looking at how we can add value as a collective, which is some really there was a word I was going to use there beginning with W phrases, but that's what we're here to do as an organisation. And I think to be able to step back and celebrate 35 years is really, really special. And I often think farmers don't get the credit for the part they play in that, simply by saying, you know what, we're going to do this, because it is so important globally that we actually celebrate that reputation piece.
Oh, it's so fantastic. And actually, Sarah, you and I are very lucky that we get to step outside quite often and really see the impact that, like, the 35 years and what we stand for here in Scotland and how we're perceived reputationally around the world. And it really does bring that message back, and it is actually quite extraordinary. Like you say, there's a huge amount of pride attached to that. So I'll be looking forward to the conversation with Kathryn and Niall later. But while we've still got you, of course, we're right on the door of Christmas now and peeking into 2026. Is there anything that you can share that you've really got your attention on already for early next year?
Well, fancy you saying that. I don't know if we're calling this a world exclusive, but I'll take the prerogative. We'll call it a world exclusive. We are bringing back the QMS conference in early 2026. So listeners may remember just on the eve of COVID, we held a QMS conference in Glasgow. So we're not quite going to replicate the same scale, or not be far off it, but we see the value, like I mentioned, about collaboration and bringing people together, particularly at this point in our strategy. So we'll be going into the third year of our delivery plan on the 1st of April 2026. So we're having a conference at Murrayfield on the 10th of March, which is really exciting. We've got a great lineup of speakers. We're really excited to see all of that come together, and invites and booking details will be launched very soon in the new year. Places will be limited, so it will be first come, first served. I think we can have about 300 people, so like I say, we're not going for huge, but we do want to see a good cohort from across the supply chain coming together, and we've got a good day's programme for that. So that's kind of first thing. Also should mention, I'm a converted football supporter. I never thought I would be quite as passionate about football as I was rugby, but after watching Scotland go through to the World Cup, I should say in the pub with some of the Scotland Food and Drink board members at the end of, I think it was the end of November, yeah. I absolutely saw the passion that the people Scotland has for football for the first time, which was really nice. And and the kind of serious point of that is America is a key market for particularly Scottish beef and Scottish lambs, so there's huge opportunity when the focus will be on the national team, both home and abroad, to raise the profile of the brands in America next year. So that's going to be a key thing for us, just looking at how again we can probably collaborate with other food and drink products to make sure that we can do that as efficiently and succinctly as possible. I think next year is going to be a really interesting year for the team. I mentioned just before that we are going to be into year 3 of our delivery plan. So we've got our 5-year strategy that we launched in 2023 and started officially on the 1st of April 2024. So as I said to the staff team at our planning day last week, year 3 is the year, it's make or break. So it's lots coming up to make sure that we can make it, and that we're not kind of step looking back in a couple of years' time and saying we wish we did a bit more then. The other big thing is that we will be changing our chair in the next financial year. So Kate comes to the end of her second 4-year term, so she can't. That's as long as she can go on. So that will be probably in the last quarter of the next financial year. So early 2027, we suspect that's when we will have a new chair. So I'm kind of looking at 2026 with a bit of a deep in, take a breath and going, there's going to be lots of change, but it's very exciting in some ways as well, because we will be 3 years into our new strategy, so we can't keep calling it a new strategy, and we'll start to see some of the big things starting to come together. So no rest for the wicked, as they say.
Well, you've got a busy few months ahead. Great to hear an exclusive on the podcast. We've got the conference coming up in March at Murrayfield. That sounds like it's going to be a fantastic event. So I'm sure lots of people will be getting their tickets booked very soon for that one, Sarah. But, and also good in saying about Kate, obviously, even she's been amazing on the podcast. She's a regular interviewee to all our listeners as well. So it'll be great to hear that process, and I'm sure she'll have lots of reflections before she heads off as well. But just wishing you a very Merry Christmas. Hope you get a bit of time off, and we'll hopefully catch up with you in early 2026.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Claire.
Thanks, Sarah. Now let's hear from Ian MacDonald about what's happening in the markets both home and abroad.
Ian, last time we spoke, you were about to head off to Brazil to attend the World Meat Congress. We have caught up with Kate Ryle, who was there with you in last month's episode, but great to hear a little bit about your perspective and what it was like for you attending.
Yeah, it was a fascinating conference, lots of different topics covered. Obviously, I knew quite a bit about any kind of market content that was going on, but some of the stuff on nutrition and split gas accounting of greenhouse gas emissions was fascinating. And we visited a ranch where they were finishing, I think, 5,500 cattle. So that was really interesting to see, because they're obviously it was a sort of tropical region right in the heart of South America, and it's those kind of Bos Indicus cattle that look a bit funny. So that was interesting, and hearing all about their systems, how different they are. 260 kilo average carcass weight, and young bulls finishing at like 20 months at 330 kilos. So you think you've got stats like that, and they've got 100 million cattle, and their production. There's so much potential if the genetics were there, but obviously they're not, I imagine, because of land capability and things like that. But yeah, lots of opportunity for them if they can get production in a better place.
It's amazing, Ian. When I was last in Brazil, the genetic conversations, I mean, and it has substantially improved in the last few years. You're talking about 20-month-old animals going to slaughter, and it used to be sort of 4 or 5 years. So amazing that you were having those earlier conversations. What were some of the main sort of takeaway messages or insights that you were particularly interested in when you were there?
I think that kind of, I guess the message from the conference really was that global demand is massive, but livestock production numbers, it's not just a Scottish thing. It's not a Scottish thing. That's everyone's really struggling with that. They're even talking about that in Brazil, where they've got 100 million cattle and they've doubled their production in 25 years or something like that. It's maybe not exact numbers, but they've seen a huge increase in production, but they're maybe sort of getting to a bit of the top of their cycle. Australia, I think they're thinking they're getting to the top of the cycle as well. And if those countries which have been sort of supplying that global market in the last couple of years, if they're starting to see a bit of a contraction, then that global picture is going to be even tighter.
And there, for a Scottish perspective, what you were seeing, obviously you've gone out to one of the feedlots, you're having conversations and seeing the sheer scale of what's happening. What is of most interest to producers that might be listening into this conversation that you were seeing or hearing?
Well, I guess they probably, from a positive perspective on our approaches, we're obviously much more productive than they are. They've obviously got huge production volumes, but very kind of low productivity in when you compare it with us. And obviously their prices are operating at a much lower level. When I went to one of the butcher shop, I think most of the products were coming in at £2 to £3 a kilo, which was quite scary. And the most expensive one was £6 a kilo. And you're thinking, geez, that's less than what finished cattle are trading for in Scotland, which was quite a difference.
I have to ask you, Ian, how did the meat taste? Well, did you enjoy it when you were out there?
Definitely not as good as it is here. Well, I would say that, wouldn't I? But it definitely, it wasn't quite as good. So, I guess it depended which sort of setting. There was one day we had a barbecue, and I guess it was sort of best of their meat, and that was good. But it was just kind of interesting. A lot of the dishes, they might sort of hide it with local cheese flavours, like a white kind of sauce, which was quite interesting. And
wow.
Quite a bit of sort of processed pork coming into, I guess, give it a sort of more salty flavour. So, but there was a pulled lamb dish, which I don't think I've ever really had pulled lamb before, and it was really good.
Oh, it's so interesting. Well, Ian, so this episode we are going to be having a conversation particularly around quality assurance, following the recent changes to cattle and sheep standards, and as QMS marks 35 years of quality assurance. With that in mind, it's just quite interesting to hear your thoughts. You've just been in Brazil, so you're having conversations around how assurance standards can open up those international opportunities, and just really your thoughts on that and how it really underpins Scotland's reputation abroad.
Yeah, well, I think whenever you go to a trade show or a conference, you really see that everyone kind of trusts our system, and that's maybe not the case in other places. If you go to Brazil, people probably have questions about they've kind of talked the talk, but actually do they back it with anything? And I think everyone's kind of aware that we are able to kind of prove our case, and why that our standards are so high.
Did you get questions while you were there? Were people quite intrigued by our story in Scotland with our meat production?
Yeah, they're always kind of fascinated by it. They've heard all the stories. And I guess a lot of them want to visit Scotland as a tourist as well. So that always ends up as part of the conversation.
Well, it's good you've been an ambassador for Visit Scotland, Ian. But going on to the market updates in general, though, can you give us a bit of a snapshot of where the red meat market is, both here at home and abroad?
Yes, I think I'll start with the global picture. Anyone you talk to across the world really is just highlighting that imbalance between supply and demand. Demand is really strong, supply is tight. Even if some countries are maybe at the top of their cattle cycle, they're feeling the pressure to supply that world market, and their prices are really strong as a result of that. And yeah, I think that kind of global consumer really is values the product. They love the taste, and then the nutrition is there. Health is obviously a quite a hot topic, certainly UK, US at the moment. Protein, vitamins, you got iron in there, and everyone's really sort of demanding it, although it's at a much higher price than it used to be. Thinking about the home market again, yeah, it's that supply and demand balance is that's what's supporting market prices at the moment. For beef, lamb, and pork is a bit softer. That's probably the one kind of the concern. Some of that is, again, if you look at the global picture, European production is up this year, and they have had additional tariffs placed on EU pork going into China, which has caused a bit of a market softening in the autumn. And there's always a bit of a seasonal downturn in the market. This year it's been a bit stronger, and then because we import such a large volume of pork, that kind of UK EU balance adjusts, and there's that competitive aspect there, and our price is about a third higher than the European price at the moment, so it's certainly weighing on things. However, you're still 10 to 15% above 5-year average for pig prices, so it's not all doom and gloom, I would say.
In this final segment, we're going to be looking at the latest updates to the QMS Cattle and Sheep Assurance Scheme, what's changed, how the process unfolded, and how the new standards strengthen both practical on-farm management and consumer trust in Scotch beef and Scotch lamb. To discuss all this and more, I was joined by farmer and QMS board member Niall Jeffrey and head of brands integrity at QMS Kathryn Kerr. So in this discussion, we're going to be looking at the latest updates to the QMS Cattle and Sheep Assurance Scheme. We're going to be discussing what's changed, why we had the refresh, and how the new standards strengthen both practical on-farm management and consumer trust in Scotch beef and Scotch lamb. And to discuss all of this and more, I'm delighted to be joined by farmer and QMS board member Niall Jeffrey and the head of brands integrity at QMS, Kathryn Kerr. Welcome both of you to the podcast.
Hi.
Hello.
Niall, I'm going to come to you first. Can you introduce yourself, what you're doing, your farming background, and a little bit about your role on the QMS board?
Yeah, of course. I'm Niall Jeffrey. I'm a mixed beef and arable farmer from East Lothian. I have been a QMS board member since 2021, and I also head up the standard setting body for the cattle and sheep standards. So that's how I'm involved in the standard setting.
And you've had a busy 18 months that we'll be getting into, Niall. And of course yourself, if you could introduce yourself, Kathryn, and the important work that you're doing around brands integrity.
Hi there, I'm Kathryn Kerr. I'm Head of Brands Integrity at Quality Meat Scotland. I've been with QMS for 6 years. Prior to being at QMS, I also managed the assurance schemes from the other side on a certification body level. I lead the operational delivery of the Brands Integrity team, ensuring robust quality assurance schemes are in place.
And I'll come back to you, Niall. Let's talk a little bit about, there's been an update, they're coming into force in January. Can you give a bit of a sort of a headline about what's been happening at your end and what's sort of unpacked for next year?
So initially the kind of the major changes are that we have streamlined the whole standard, so there's less repetition of standards, and try to kind of get more out of a couple of individual standards, including the animal health and welfare section. So I suppose that's the headline. We can go into more detail about individual standards, but the extra difference, I suppose, this time round is that there was a round of consultation with members, which we can go into a bit more detail about later on, whereas historically we didn't have that extra kind of input from all members.
And what were there certain things that were driving the need for the update? What was the sort of main thing behind that, Niall?
So we update the standards periodically every sort of 3 to 5 years, and that's really to keep up with change in agricultural practice, change in legislation, and change in consumer demands, I suppose, or consumer trends. So it's a good thing to kind of keep these standards up to date the whole time. And yeah, we go for Kathryn will maybe kind of correct me on that, but about 3 to 5 years is about what we're looking to update our standards at the moment.
Yeah, and I'll bring you in there, Kathryn, just in terms of your perspective on that, in terms of what was needed for these updates, and were there any areas particularly that needed greater clarity or modernisation?
So as part of the standard setting process, we review our standards annually, and it could just be a case of we get the standard setting board together, we have a conversation about where things are going, we look into the future, horizon scanning type thing. This time round it was a full review, so we do a full review every sort of 3 years. It is quite a long process. By the time you start the consultation, you do benchmarking at the start, then the consultation goes out to all the membership, then we sit down with all the changes to the standard setting board, and it goes on for a long time. We need to make sure we get it right. We can't just go out and say here's what's happening. We need to involve everybody along the way, so it's really important to make sure we have the time to get it right.
And were there any sort of, I mean, it sounds like a huge process that you've both been involved in, and actually gathering member feedback has been a big part of this exercise. I mean, was there anything that really sort of surprised you, or anything that really stood out as part of the process?
In terms of feedback from members?
Yeah, and in terms of how that was maybe driving the kind of directional changes?
Yeah, so probably further down the line, when we had sat with the standard setting body, we put out a document, a sort of survey to members that gives them the opportunity to feed into, here's our sort of key headline changes that are going to be happening. There isn't any significant major changes that are going to affect them too badly. It's more about, this time, about streamlining. But what changes we did propose at that stage, there was actually one that came back, it was about a feed standard. I don't know if you can remember the one, Neil. We put a proposed change in, and then the rationale behind it, and a lot of feedback came back to say this will not work, this is not going to work in practice. So what we did was we had a further standard setting body meeting, and we decided that we'll put it in as a recommendation so we could gauge that going forward. It just shows how important it is for members to feed back at this stage, because if we didn't have that, we would have put a standard in there, and then it would be we can't comply, and we need to make sure we have that communication, open lines with the membership to ensure that we get it right.
I mean, that's so important what you said there, Kathryn, about, well, this isn't going to work in practice. And I think that's the thing often, and that is one of the issues behind these things, is this practically going to be deliverable? I mean, for what was really important for you, Neil, in terms of the diversity of input that you were getting, and how do you ensure that the different voices and sectors really get to contribute?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the important thing is to be completely open and accept all feedback, so negative and positive. There's no point in ignoring things, even if they're criticizing certain standards. So and we did, and we actually sat down after the consultation as a standard setting body again and went through and had all the input, all the comments coming in from all the members. So I think that's important. It sometimes sort of makes us think like, right, well, we'll need to justify what we're asking sometimes, just make sure that we're doing the right thing. And as Kathryn says, sometimes you're picking up things that weren't discussed in the room that actually are quite important that industry point out, and you can make a decision based on that. So I think that's the important thing, is just being accepting to everything coming back.
And before we go into some of the more detail around this, do you get a sense, get a positive feedback from the way it's been handled and the way that you've been quite collaborative in the approach? What have members been feeding back? From what I mean, sometimes you'll hear more from the stakeholder organisations. Involved in Scottish agriculture, so NFUS, NSA. SBA. So you're maybe hearing more from the organisations, but as far as I'm aware, it's been quite positive, rather than individual members kind of saying that they like the process. But certainly the lobbying groups and the as I say, Scottish stakeholders in Scottish agriculture have been fairly positive about the extra stage, and also maybe the time taken to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the likes of NFUS and SBA and NSA, they're all represented on the committee, they're really good at pulling all their groups together and sending out sort of like some changes that are going to be happening, getting the feedback in, and they'll bring all that to the meeting, so their voices are always heard. It's just they might not want to put something individually in, but if it's through like another organisation, their voice is heard, because quite often it's maybe one or two people that will go forward and that same thing's said over and over again. So it becomes quite important. If you've had 2 or 3 people saying the same thing, it must be an issue out there that you have to pull forward to the meeting. And like Niall says, positive and negative, we take all the feedback forward, we take it to the standard setting board. It's a long day, we go through everything in detail, but everyone's voice is heard, and feedback can be given on any point that's put in.
So Niall, coming back to you, one of the headlines from the changes to standards has been that 15% reduction in standards. What does that mean to farmers?
I think that means that the standards should be clearer about what they're asking, more direct about what's involved in meeting certain criteria, and there's less, I suppose, less to read through and understand, which, you know, that's a bit of a time saving for members involved.
Everyone loves to hear about time saving. Kathryn, even just yourself to add to what I've asked Niall.
I think for members, the assessment will remain consistent. There won't be a massive change. They won't notice a massive difference in practical perspective, but the streamlining of sections will provide a better flow of assessment. So when the assessor's on farm, everything hopefully will flow better, and there's less questions on the same thing, and they're all sort of amalgamated in. That was the reason behind it. Sometimes you found that you were asking the same question, or the assessors were asking the same question maybe 2 or 3 times, because it was covered in so many different standards. So what we've done is we've tried to streamline that so it's all in one section. So the farmer's not going to get asked 100 times about the same thing. It's really just, it's all a conversation. It should be a relaxed sort of conversation, and all the information could be pulled from that.
Kathryn, can you share a bit more of the detail around some of the changes to the standards?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, like we said earlier, there's a lot of streamlining taking place in amalgamation of standards this time round. But one of the big changes was the animal health and welfare planning. So, following significant feedback from members and assessors and the stakeholders on the standard setting body, we did conduct a thorough review on this particular section to make sure it was easier to follow, to understand. We looked at bringing the 2 standards, so 2 main standards together, which was the health plan and the review of the health plan. We tried so hard to make it one standard, but it just didn't quite fit. So what we've done is we've got the animal health and welfare plan, which is completely separate, and that can now be written by, well, it's always been written by either the farmer, who know the stock more than anyone themselves, a suitably qualified person, a vet, or any other person that's related to the farm. It doesn't need to be signed by the vet anymore, the health plan, but what does need to have involved vet input is the health and welfare review. So they review a variety of different areas, including the antibiotic usage and sort of recurring problems on the farm. That has to be undertaken by a review. The animal health and welfare review needs to be reviewed by the vet and signed off by the vet.
Interesting. And just listening in, Niall, for yourself farming, what does it mean to you, some of these changes?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, it's clarity now. Historically, it was a bit of a mixed kind of understanding of what do I have to get a vet to come and do as part of the health and welfare planning, and do they have to write a plan every year, and should we change it every year? And I think actually, for me, it's the clarity of it that the plan stays the same, and it gets updated when it needs updated, but it's the vet has to be involved in the animal health and welfare review, which is as Kathryn said, it's a kind of review of the performance of the flock or herd on the farm, and things like the antibiotic use and things like that.
And obviously one of the really important things to discuss as part of this is about consumer trust and brand integrity. And just staying with you, Niall, these updated standards, how do they really help strengthen consumer confidence in Scotch beef and Scotch lamb, and how important are they?
So first of all, I feel they're hugely important. I'm a store beef producer, and I have a small 6 or so lambs. And I always find the only thing I have that I can communicate or prove to a consumer that the level of standards I'm putting into a product is through the quality assurance scheme. And when it actually gets on a shelf to retailers, the little stamp, the Scotch beef, Scotch lamb stamp on the shelf. So to me, that's the huge part of the supply chain. The quality assurance scheme that's provided by QMS covers that whole life of animal from birth to retail. So I think that's hugely important. And updating them is really just keeping up with consumer trends and agricultural practices as well. So I think it's really important both to have them and to keep them up to date.
And Kathryn, listening into that as well, because this is so touching on all the work that you're doing. I mean, how important is that to you and what you're doing and what you're hearing from consumers and what they value and how we're producing?
I feel like when we update our standards, it reinforces that consumer trust by keeping our assurance schemes up to date, transparent, showing that Scotch beef and Scotch lamb are produced to consistently high standards.
And how does QMS balance remaining robust, maintaining robust, credible standards while keeping them workable for producers?
I think that really comes to the consultation with the industry. As Kathryn said, we benchmark against other quality assurance schemes before we start a full review, so we know where other quality assurance schemes within this country and abroad are, where they're expecting to be. We then go and consult the stakeholders that are on the standard setting body who are representing the industry there, and then so sort of seeing what where the consumer would like areas to move into, standards to change, and then checking with industry that they're actually possible. And then obviously the extra step of checking with all members. All members received an email saying what are we proposing to change and why are we proposing to change it, and could feedback that in. So I think that's the real balance is one, doing the consumer survey, two, doing the benchmarking, and then three, consulting with industry so that everyone is coming with us together on it.
Do you think this sense of farmer ownership of the standards and not being imposed externally, do you think that's quite unique here and to the work that you're both involved in, or when you're looking at you said there it's important to look at what other standards and processes are doing, is this quite a unique point for QMS?
Well, certainly we are involving all members of the supply chain. We have no retailers on our standard setting body. I think that's quite an important point to point out to other members and producers. So no one sitting from a large supermarket sort of demanding anything, and it is all really industry representatives. Off the top of my head, I want to say there's maybe 10 or 11 farmers in the standard setting body. I could be, so although they're there representing organizations, they're farming in their own right or are involved in a farming business. Yeah. And I think that definitely helps, for a practical input put on these points. If someone's sitting there saying, no, that's not possible because I know I've drawn fat lambs at this time of year and I know that that's just going to be unrealistic. So that input is really invaluable.
And Kathryn, I mentioned right at the start of our chat just now is that we're marking 35 years of Scottish Assurance. And just looking back over 35 years of assurance, are there any achievements or milestones that really stand out to you?
Over the years, I've seen firsthand the pride our members take in being part of the scheme. Quality assurance isn't just about compliance, it's about shared commitment to do the right things every day. I guess that's what keeps our Scottish brands trusted by consumers and respected around the world. Going back to Niall's comment about the standard setting body, it's 67% farmers on that committee. So it just goes to show how much input they have on making them more practical for the members.
And for you, Kathryn, how will QMS, and thinking about the role that you're involved in, how will they continue to evolve the scheme to reflect future expectations and innovation in farming?
There's a lot going on across the organisation right now. It is really exciting to see the collaboration, innovation and progress we look ahead to, from evolving the assurance standards to looking at digital transformation. I guess it's just about continuing to build on the legacy that we've got. The trust that began in 1990, I think we began, so yeah.
And Neil, being part of this review, how has it shaped your outlook on the future of Scottish livestock farming?
Yeah, it's definitely a positive future, I think. And I feel like also the 35 years of quality assurance, we're still we're still making our decisions based on the same principle that you're providing the consumer with a level of trust, and you having to evidence that through being a member of a quality assurance scheme. So I like the fact that within 35 years the principle is still the same, although we are evolving with changing agricultural practices, and changing trends in consumer behaviour. It still is as valid today as it was 35 years ago, and I think it will be valid for the next 35 years. That's quite a prediction in the future there, but I don't think that will change.
And Neil, what message would you like fellow farmers to take from the update and the direction of travel?
I think just that it's not, well, one, don't be afraid of the change, because it's quite subtle, and the reason for being an update in the scheme is it doesn't change the reasons for being involved in a quality assurance scheme. So if you buy into that, then um, it's going to be fine. It's going to be good. Um,
And the same question to yourself, Kathryn, just for listeners who are tuning into this discussion. What do you think should be the main things that are front of mind for them?
Just don't see it as a burden to you. If you need support, get in touch. We are here to help. The Brands Integrity team can provide advice. Unfortunately, the assessors in a role where it's an accredited scheme, they can't provide advice through the accredited process, but the Brands Integrity team at QMS can. So we are here at the end of a phone, happy to speak to people to provide any advice on how to comply with standards, or just take that sort of edge off the, oh no, I've got an assessment. It shouldn't be a scary experience. It should be an opportunity for you to showcase your livestock. It shouldn't, any worries, please get in touch. Yeah.
And just to finish and to take it sort of kind of big picture and maybe move outside our shores, I was just speaking to Ian McDonald before this discussion. He'd just come back from the World Meat Congress in Brazil, and it was interesting. He was reflecting on where Scotland sits in terms of trust and how a big part of that is the assurance behind what we do. And I think it's something that, they're still very much evolving and updating, and so many countries around the world are. And I guess we've seen so much change, haven't we, in recent months, months, not even years, around trade deals coming in thick and fast, and how important what we're doing here with these standards is for really setting Scotland apart. And just, I guess, from both of you to finish about just a kind of a strong message around the importance of assurance, sort of thinking about the changes in the world right now. Don't know who wants to take that first, maybe yourself, Neil?
yeah, absolutely. Again, it's the principles of quality assurance that we started with, and we do benchmark against international competitors effectively. So we're there trying to keep ourselves as a kind of premium product above or in front of the rest of the world, let's say. And if that's telling its own story. 35 years, and even before that, historically, Scotland was thought of as producing very high quality stock and meat. So I think that's now more than ever more vital that we kind of keep investing in that quality idea of a high premium kind of product against imports.
And yourself, Kathryn, any final reflections on that?
Again, just going back to the benchmarking, we start the process of our standards review with benchmarking, like Neil said. It's very much seen where we sit in terms of our competitors, taking forward potential changes that will make us that little bit better than others. I suppose for members, farmers, crofters, it's about embracing the change and, seeking out support if you need support from us, because that's what we're here for.
And of course, these changes come into effect in January 2026. And just to sort of finished, where can listeners go to find out more about these changes and to really expand on the conversation we've had?
So they'll find information on our website. It's in our newsletters. We're sending out reminders every week just to remind members that the changes are coming into effect on the 1st of January. They can also talk to our certification body, Food Integrity Assurance, because they'll be able to provide any sort of support on things as well. Yep.
It's the information.
Well, thank you both.
Sorry.
No, go on, Neil.
The information is actually in the standards document. So the actual document that was sent that members should received has an explanation in there of where to find further information and support, as Kathryn says.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing a bit about the changes and also the process that's gone into a long consultation process, which has really been, as Kathryn pointed out, heavily farmer influenced, 65% of the committee being made up of farmers. And it's just really interesting to get your insights and look forward to hearing an update maybe in the future. But thank you both so much for your time on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen for more monthly episodes as we continue to explore the vital topics affecting the red meat industry. If you want to stay updated with the latest news in our sector, be sure to sign up for the weekly QMS newsletter by emailing info@qmsscotland.co.uk. Join us next time for more insights from experts, farmers and industry leaders. But until then, stay connected with us on our social channels and keep up with the latest news from Quality Meat Scotland.